It happened during a quiet moment at an international health summit in Geneva. Dr. Anthony Fauci, sitting beside leaders from Europe, Asia, and Africa, leaned into his mic. His voice was calm, his words careful, but one sentence broke the air like glass. Africa still has a long way to go in managing global responsibility. It was subtle. No one gasped. No one protested. The room remained still. But far away in Ouagadougou, one man didn't stay quiet. That man was Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the 36-year-old leader of Burkina Faso, a rising voice for African dignity, sovereignty, and truth. He watched the clip late at night in his office, hands clenched, jaw tight. This wasn't just about a comment. It was about decades of humiliation, about lives lost from unfair vaccine policies, about being spoken down to again. Traoré didn't respond immediately. Instead, he waited. And then he wrote something. Not a tweet, not a press release, but a speech. One that would echo far beyond Africa. The world didn't know it yet, but something was about to shake the entire internet and leave Dr. Fauci in stunned silence. And it all started with that one sentence. For 2 days, Ibrahim Traoré didn't speak to the media. But across social platforms, the clip of Fauci's comment began to go viral, especially in Africa. People were angry, but also tired. Tired of being told they were not ready. Tired of Western experts acting like Africa was a project, not a partner. Traoré's team advised him to let it go. But that wasn't who he was. He remembered standing beside grieving mothers during Ebola. He remembered how, during the COVID-19 pandemic, vaccines were hoarded by rich nations while Burkina Faso waited, forgotten. He remembered the children. One image haunted him. A barefoot boy who died outside a village clinic because there weren't enough basic supplies, while warehouses in the West overflowed. That night, he walked outside alone. The streets of Ouagadougou were quiet. The stars above seemed to watch him, and he whispered to himself, "They don't get to tell our story anymore." He looked at his hands, calloused from years of struggle, and said, "It's time." At dawn, he sent a single message to his media team. Book the National Auditorium. Full press, full camera, no script. The world didn't know. But history was about to be written. The auditorium filled up within hours. Word spread fast. Something big was coming. There were no banners, no introductions. Just Ibrahim Traoré stepping to the podium, holding nothing but a handwritten paper. The room fell silent. Even the cameras stopped clicking. And then he spoke. When a man who has never stood in our storms tells us we are not ready, it is not wisdom. It is arrogance. He paused, looked up. We waited for vaccines while the West decided who was worthy. We buried our mothers while billionaires debated intellectual property. And now, when we stand on our feet, proud and unshaken, we're told, again, to wait. People held their breath. Dr. Fauci, I respect your years, but not your silence when Africa bled. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. But each word hit harder than thunder. Even his critics sat frozen. This is not just about medicine. It's about dignity, about voices long ignored. It ends today. Tears filled the eyes of many watching live. One camera caught a nurse in Burkina Faso crying. And then, with a final, steady voice, Traoré said, "We are not the shadow. We are the sunrise." The video would reach 12 million views in 10 hours. But this was just the beginning. The speech was just 11 minutes long, but by nightfall it was everywhere. Instagram reels, TikTok clips, WhatsApp groups in Senegal, Kenya, South Africa, then in France, Brazil, New York. We're the Sunrise trended #1 globally. People weren't just watching, they were weeping. They saw their own histories in Traoré's words. Nurses in Haiti, farmers in India, black communities in Detroit, indigenous leaders in Colombia. Something had cracked open. Meanwhile, Dr. Fauci remained silent. No tweet, no statement, just silence. In Washington, D.C., a closed-door meeting was held. "Damage control," one advisor whispered. "Why is the world siding with him?" another asked. Because it wasn't just about Traoré anymore. It was about truth. A young African-American doctor posted, "I've followed Fauci my whole career, but today, I cried watching a man from Burkina Faso say what needed to be said for all of us." At a village school in Mali, children gathered around a dusty phone to rewatch the speech. A teacher whispered, "You'll remember this when you grow up." Traoré didn't reply to praise. He stayed silent again. He was preparing for what would come next, and it would shake the foundations of global power. 3 days later, the White House scheduled an emergency press conference. Dr. Fauci stepped up to the podium, older, tired, clearly shaken. His voice wavered slightly. "I never intended to offend anyone, least of all a continent that has endured so much." But the words felt hollow, too careful, too late. One journalist asked, "Do you regret your statement, Dr. Fauci?" He hesitated. "I regret how it was interpreted." The room fell cold. That clip spread just as fast as Traoré's speech, but this time it was followed by a wave of disappointment. "Not how it was interpreted," one Kenyan woman tweeted. "Regret what you said." At that moment, something shifted globally. People didn't want politics. They wanted accountability. Real words, real change. Meanwhile, Traoré was quiet. Again. He was working behind the scenes, meeting with young African scientists, nurses, midwives, students. He was drafting a plan, something no African leader had ever done in this way before. And at the heart of it all was a secret that hadn't yet been made public. A truth so powerful, so deeply human, it would change everything. But the world wasn't ready for it. Not yet. Late one night, inside a dimly lit office in Ouagadougou, Traoré sat with an old folder in his hands. It was worn, edges frayed, a single word handwritten on the front. Denied. Inside were medical documents, emails, and a letter, one that had been sent to the World Health Organization 5 years earlier. It was from a Burkinabe virologist, a brilliant woman named Dr. Awa Konate. She had developed a potential malaria vaccine based on a rare West African strain. But her funding had been denied. Why? Insufficient infrastructure, the letter said. Lack of Western partnership. A year later, she died from the very disease she was trying to cure. Her village mourned in silence. No headlines, no outrage. Now, Traoré held her letter like a fragile piece of history. He whispered her name. Awa. This time they will hear you. He stood up, heart pounding. The next morning, in front of the cameras, he held the folder up and said, "They called us unprepared, but when we prepare, they block us. When we rise, they silence us. Today, I open this folder for the world to see." And that's when the tears truly began, not just in Africa, but everywhere. Traoré didn't read the entire letter during the press conference. Instead, he held it up and said, "This is the voice of a forgotten hero. Let her words be louder than mine." Then the screen behind him lit up, and the letter from Dr. Awa Konate appeared. Her handwriting was delicate, but her words were fire. "If I die before this is funded, tell the world I did not give up on them. I just ran out of time." Silence gripped the room. One cameraman dropped his lens and wept. Journalists stared at the screen in disbelief. The footage instantly flooded social media, spliced with images of her grave, her lab, her village. Young African girls in white coats posted photos holding stethoscopes, captioned, "For Awa, for us." Meanwhile, in the U.S., Dr. Fauci watched the footage alone in his office. His assistant said, "Should we prepare a second statement?" He didn't answer. He simply stared at the screen and blinked away a tear. What Traoré had done wasn't just political. It was personal. It was raw, human, real. And it wasn't over, because what he did next, no one saw coming. 2 days after releasing Awa's letter, something shocking happened. A Burkina Bay IT volunteer, a quiet man named Idris, working in the presidential archives, found an old USB drive in a drawer of forgotten correspondence. He almost dismissed it, but curiosity won. He plugged it in and froze. There, in a hidden folder, was a leaked email chain between a US-based pharmaceutical executive, a European fund manager, and a high-ranking official from an African health agency. The subject line: Awa's vaccine. Shut it down. The emails revealed that Dr. Awa's work was seen as a threat to Western pharma profits. One line read, "If she's right, we'll lose our grip on malaria funding. Keep her small." Idris printed the emails, hands shaking, and brought them directly to Traoré. For hours, Traoré said nothing, just sat at his desk, head bowed. Then quietly he said, "It was never incompetence. It was theft of dreams, of futures." That night, Traoré made a choice that would either make him a global legend or put him in serious danger. He decided to go public again. But this time, it wouldn't just be a speech. It would be something far more powerful. On the evening of May 19th, every major African news outlet received a direct signal transmission from the Burkina Faso presidential office. Traoré stood in front of a screen, not behind a podium. Behind him, scrolling slowly, were the leaked emails. He didn't yell. He didn't accuse. He just told a story. This is how heroes are buried, not in soil, but in silence. This is why they call us unprepared, so they can stay in control. And this is why we rise now, not in revenge, but in remembrance. The speech was translated into 17 languages. Thousands gathered in village squares to watch together. A mother in Tanzania held her daughter's hand and whispered, "Look at him. That's what courage looks like." In Paris, students marched with signs that read "Justice for Awa" and "Let Africa breathe." Even in America, activists began demanding investigations into vaccine funding ethics. The twist? Traoré ended the speech by holding up Awa's photo and saying, "This woman's formula was never destroyed. We found it. We're building the lab ourselves." The crowd watching from the streets erupted in cheers and tears. The world was waking up. But the fight was just beginning. Just 3 days after the global broadcast, Burkina Faso's newly built community research center, funded by local donations and volunteers, was attacked in the dead of night. No one died, but flames devoured equipment, solar panels, and the first version of Dr. Awa's reassembled vaccine prototype. The nation was stunned. Traoré visited the scene at sunrise. He didn't speak to the cameras. He knelt in the ashes, picked up a half-burnt notebook, and quietly wept. Not just for the building, but for the dream. The attackers were never officially identified. Rumors spread fast. International sabotage, corrupt insiders, threatened interests. But there was no proof. Still, something changed in that moment. Traoré didn't grow angry. He grew louder. "You can burn the building," he said, "but you cannot burn our will." The world saw a side of him they hadn't seen before, not just a leader, but a grieving brother, carrying a nation's dreams on his back. Millions posted the same phrase that day: "We are all Awa now." And while some tried to silence him, what they didn't know was that a different kind of fire had just started. The very next morning, Traoré received a phone call. It wasn't official, no press, no recording. It was Dr. Anthony Fauci. The line was quiet at first. Then, softly, Fauci said, "I saw what happened. I'm sorry." Traoré didn't interrupt. He let the silence carry the weight of everything unsaid. Fauci continued, I won't pretend I understand the pain, but I want to help now, not with a headline, with action. For a moment, Traoré said nothing. Then, in a steady voice, he asked, Why now? Fauci sighed. Because I watched your people mourn in the streets, and because I read Awa's letter. Again, I have grandchildren. I couldn't sleep. Traoré didn't forgive him, not instantly, but he asked for one thing. Don't help behind closed doors. If you believe in what we're doing, say it, where the world can hear you. Fauci paused. Then give me one day. And he kept his word. What came next would shock the entire world and turn the internet upside down. The next day, Dr. Fauci stood before a crowded press room in Washington, D.C. The world was watching. His hands trembled slightly as he opened a folder, the same folder Traoré had held, a copy of Awa's letter. For the first time in my career, he began, I am not here to speak. I'm here to listen. He paused, then continued. A young African woman created something the world desperately needed, and instead of support, she was ignored. Because of systems I've been part of, systems that benefit from silence. The room fell still. I regret more than my words. I regret my silence, and today I stand not as a scientist, but as a human being who failed to do enough. Cameras flashed. Some reporters gasped. He looked directly into the lens. Ibrahim Traoré is right. Africa doesn't need permission to lead. It already is. The clip went viral. Again, some called it too late. Some called it brave. But most agreed. The world had changed, and for the first time it wasn't Africa asking to be heard. It was the world listening. 1 week after Fauci's global confession, Traoré traveled without an entourage to a small village in southern Burkina Faso. Awa's home. No media, no soldiers. Just him, walking barefoot through red clay roads, past quiet homes and barefoot children. At the edge of the village stood a tiny mud house. Outside sat an elderly woman, frail, quiet, her back slightly curved from years of work. Her name was Maimouna Konaté, Awa's mother. Traoré knelt before her, not as a president, but as a son. He took her hand gently and said, Your daughter woke up the world. Tears slid down Maimouna's cheeks. She whispered, she wanted to help the people who never got help. Traoré pulled a box from his bag. Inside was a golden pin, engraved with the words, For Awa, the unshaken. He pinned it to her scarf, hands trembling. The entire village watched in silence. Then Maimouna said something that broke everyone's heart. She died with no one listening, but maybe now she can rest. The video of this moment leaked days later, and around the world millions cried, not for a leader, not for politics, but for a mother who had finally been heard. Meanwhile, as the world rallied around Traoré's mission, one story quietly began to spread. In a rural clinic near the border, a young boy named Issa was fighting for his life. He had contracted a rare strain of malaria, the very type Awa's vaccine targeted. His mother had walked 9 miles to get him there. But the medicine was running out. The clinic had no electricity that day, and the boy's fever had reached 40 degrees Celsius. A volunteer doctor named Fatima whispered, If we had Awa's formula, we could try. They sent a message to the capital. Within hours, Traoré's team arrived with a cold box, carried through dirt roads, across broken bridges, by hand. Inside, the first safe test sample of Awa's restored formula. The room fell still as it was administered. For 12 hours, Issa didn't move. His mother prayed. Nurses took turns fanning him. And then, at dawn, he opened his eyes. He whispered just one word. Mama. Everyone burst into tears. Even the cameraman put down the lens and wept. The footage of Issa's survival spread like wildfire, and across the globe, people finally understood. This wasn't just about justice. It was about saving lives. The week after Issa's survival, something no one expected happened. Across Africa, in Senegal, Ghana, Rwanda, Kenya, children marched. No adults told them to. No governments organized it. They simply came together, holding handmade signs, some written in crayon, others painted on torn cardboard. We are the sunrise. Thank you, Ibrahim. Awa lives in us. In Ouagadougou, over 5,000 schoolchildren filled the streets, their chants echoing for miles. Traoré stood on the palace balcony, watching with tears running down his face. He turned to an aide and said, "This is the real revolution." Even world leaders couldn't ignore it. The UN released a statement. France's health minister tweeted support for funding African-led medical research. And in New York, children at a Harlem school did a presentation titled, "The Boy Who Lived, the Woman Who Was Silenced, the Man Who Spoke." But behind the celebration, a storm was brewing. A powerful institution had quietly launched a campaign to discredit Traoré, to twist the narrative. They wanted to make him the villain. And just as the world leaned in to finally listen, the truth was at risk of being buried. Again. Just as hope was blooming across the world, headlines began to shift. An anonymous report claimed that Ibrahim Traoré had exaggerated Awa's story, that the vaccine formula was not fully tested, that the movement was emotional, not scientific. It spread fast. Big outlets, slick graphics, and cold clinical language. Suddenly, talk shows began questioning his leadership. "Is Traoré just another populist?" one anchor asked. But what they didn't count on was the people. Doctors who had worked with Awa spoke out. Journalists traced the source of the smear, a consulting firm linked to pharmaceutical giants threatened by Awa's low-cost breakthrough. In a powerful live stream viewed by 22 million, Traoré spoke from a quiet room. They don't fear lies. They fear truth that heals without profit. He pulled out Awa's original notes, handwritten pages, still smudged with her fingerprints. This is not just paper. This is a life's work, a sacrifice. As tears ran down his cheeks, the internet exploded. "Stand with Traoré" trended globally, and for every lie told, 1,000,000 hearts stood taller. But Traoré knew the fight wasn't over, because one final truth was still to come. That evening, Traoré received a package with no return address. Inside was a USB drive. It held a video, dated just 2 days before Awa died. In it, she sat on a hospital bed, breathing through an oxygen tube. Her voice was soft, but her eyes were fierce. "If you're watching this, I didn't make it, but please don't mourn me. Use me." She looked into the lens. "Tell President Traoré I believed in him, that he saw us, not as problems to be fixed, but as people to be empowered." Then she smiled faintly. "If one child lives because of what we built, then my life was worth it." Her voice cracked. "And to the world, please don't wait for us to die before you listen." The video ended. No music, no edits, just raw truth. Traoré released it publicly. That night, millions cried. Videos of entire classrooms watching it in silence went viral. Celebrities, world leaders, and even skeptics posted one word: "Forgive us." And in that moment, Awa was no longer forgotten. She became eternal. 1 month later, in a packed auditorium in Nairobi, Ibrahim Traoré walked on stage. Behind him, a single chair, empty, draped with Awa's scarf. He looked out at thousands of young Africans, doctors, farmers, students, leaders. "They tried to bury our story," he said, "but they didn't know we were seeds." A standing ovation shook the building. Then he paused, reached into his jacket, and pulled out Issa's school drawing. A stick figure with the words, "Thank you, Ibrahim. I'm alive because Awa loved." He held it high. "This is the future." And with trembling hands he knelt, not in weakness but in honor, before the chair. Silence. Then thunderous applause. Some wept. Others hugged strangers. But everyone felt it. This was no longer a story about Fauci, or power, or politics. It was about the voice of a people finally heard. If this story moved you, if you cried, smiled, or saw the world differently, do one thing for Awa. Click like, smash that subscribe, and drop a comment below. I stand with truth. Let's flood this space with voices that refuse to be silenced again. Share this with someone who needs to believe that hope is still real. Together, we carry the story forward. And like Traoré said, they tried to bury us, but we are seeds. Thank you for watching. Let's rise together.